So the first step is to bring all the data you have into a workable format. So in this case, we have one tab which have named gas MCF a day, and what I have here is the date on column A, and then I have one column per well with the well names running on the first row and all the production profiles running each column for each well. Now, bringing the data into this format is something that can be done. This can be production data coming from a separate production database in a different Excel workbook, or it could be coming from an OFM export, or it could be, for example, the results of a simulation model. So all of these are the outputs for each well. So there are many ways to go about bringing the data into this format, but for the sake of this example, we're going to assume that we've already completed those steps and we brought the data and we've arranged the data into this format. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is to turn this data into an Excel table. And the way we do that is we just go with the control keyboard, the control keystroke and T. So control T actually brings this little window here and it asks you, does this table have headers? And you go, yes. And as simple as that, you turn this into an Excel table. The advantage of turning this into a table is for referencing elsewhere in the workbook, and then when you update the table and you add stuff, this whole thing rearranges automatically. Okay, so the next thing we can do here is to come up here to the top left and we can rename this table we just created. So in this case, let's say this is going to be renamed as gas. Let's do it like that. Okay, so that's it. So that's our very first step. Bring the data into the format we desire, and then we turn this into an Excel table, and we give that table a name. Okay, the second step in our process is going to be creating the data model. The data model is essentially an invisible table with all the data we have rearranged in a specific way. And the data is going to live in the memory of this file, and we're going to be able to pull that data into various tables and charts down the track whenever we want in the workbook without the need of us creating new Excel tables and rearranging this data into different formats without creating any duplicates. So it's a very efficient way to actually work with a single data set. Okay, so the way to create a data model is you come here on that data menu at the top, and then we're going to select the From Table Range button. That's going to bring up the Power Query Editor, and all the data of that table we just selected, the gas rate table, is going to be presented here in this fashion. So we want to do a couple of adjustments first. We notice that the date column is containing the date and also the time. We're not interested in the time, so we're just going to right click on the date, and we're going to go change type. We're going to change to date. Okay, replace current, yes. So just turn that into a date only, no time. And then what we want to do is to bring all these other well production profiles down into a couple of columns only. So the way to do that is we're going to go again on the date column. We're going to right click and select unpivot other columns. Okay, so we do that. What's going to happen is all of those columns will be rotated or transposed, if you will. Not quite, but that's the impression that you would get, is everything is brought down into a long 3-column table. So in here you have, for example, the date, 1st of Jan 2020, is repeated many times because for each date, each 1st of January date in the original data set, there are different wells, and for each well there is a read of the original table attribute we had. Okay, so in this case, we're going to rename the attribute column to well name for clarity, and the value here, we know that that value is gas rate. So let's put the unit for clarity as well in the label. Okay, so that's it. As a first step, we have our entire data set now being simplified into a long table with 3 columns: date, well name, and rate. And to finish up this step, what we're going to do is to go to here to that little triangle to open up, and then we're going to choose close and load to. and we're going to choose only create connection and add this data to the data model. Okay, we don't want to create new tables in our workbook. We just want to create a connection to a data model. That means all this data will be now living in that invisible table in the memory of the file, which contains all those three columns we just adjusted. Okay, so that's it. We've created the data model. So now you see here on the right hand side pane, it says queries and connection. We have our query created. It has 49,000 rows loaded. So that's the data model as it currently stands. Let's now use that data model we just created, and let's pull the data to create some additional charts and tables in the workbook. So let's create a new tab, and let's name that tab playground. Okay, we're gonna come here, and what we want to do is to invoke the data model, right? So the way to do that is we're just going to create a pivot chart as a first step. So the way to do that is you go here and insert pivot chart. Okay, let's click there, and in this window we're going to select use this workbook's data model. That's the option we want, and we want to create that chart on the existing worksheet. Actually, it's going to offer you the cell that was selected before you clicked on that create pivot chart button. So we're going to just go OK here, and this will bring this placeholder. So you can place this anywhere. This is a chart waiting for you to select the data from that data table, right? So you notice here on the right hand side, this is brought up. So pivot chart fields. So this is where we're going to select what exactly is that we want to bring to the chart from the data model, right? So you notice here there are two gas rates options here. So the first one with that little red lock, that is the data model. So if we open that up, you see now we have the three columns we had created in our Power Query editor in the last video, if you recall, right? This other one is the original source table, right? So we're not going to use that one to create our chart. We're going to use the data model to create the chart. Those two have the same names because we created the data model from the original source table, right? But in this case, let's focus on the data model, which is up here with that red little lock symbol, okay? So what we want to do is to drag the date to the axis field down here, categories, right? And then what we want to actually plot is the gas rate. So that's we're going to be dragged to that values placeholder here. And then in the legends, we want to bring the well name because we want to have all the wells being graphed on the same chart. Okay, let's say that we've created a chart of the gas rate production profile for each well. Okay, so we can expand this a little bit to see better. We can actually, change this chart as you would do with any other Excel chart. Let's change it to a line type uh, for better visualization. And the other cosmetic thing we can do here is just to get rid of all these buttons. Just go onto any of these buttons. Just right click. You can choose hide all field buttons on chart. So it's going to remove all those buttons. A couple of other things you can do. You can add obviously titles to your axis. Let's say we want to just rename the vertical axis like so. Uh, let's bring the size a little bit up. And that's it. Let's say that we're happy with how this thing looks. So we're ready for the next step, which is about creating now a pivot table, not a pivot chart. Let's do a couple of more things on this chart. First, you will notice that if we click on the cells, this right-hand side pane disappears. If you click back on the chart, it comes back. You also will notice that on the pivot chart analyze menu here, you have these buttons. Again, what this does is it brings on and off that right hand side, and this is with the buttons we actually removed in the prior step, if you recall. So you see on and off, okay? So just in case you're wondering where your things are, All right. Now let's bring the size a little bit annoying. It's too big for me. So let's bring that to that. Let's bring that down to that size. And in here, one thing that we need to correct is you will notice here on the values little space here, it says sum of QG. So we need to change that to average. So value field settings, let's change that to average. Now, why do we need to do that? So originally we had a data set where we ran basically the date column. We had one row per month, and then each well production profile, each rate value is the average rate in MCF a day. So it's one per month. So when you start, um, putting all of this together in the different time periods, let's say a quarter or a month, or a year, you don't want to be summing up all the reads within the 1 year. You actually want to be averaging all the reads within the year. So what you get as a result of that is the yearly average rate for the year, right? So that will depend on the type of data you're working with, on the tables and the source data. But in this case, what makes sense is for us to actually average all our original reads within each time period which we select to report and view things in, either charts or tables. Okay, so that's an important step. You can't forget to change that values into, in this case, the average, not the sum. Okay, now the next thing we can do here is, again, you click on the chart, you go to that pivot chart analyze menu, and we are going to add a slicer. Okay, and in this case we want to have a slicer for the well. So what this does is it creates for you a very nice interactive little pane here, which is connected to the chart. And in this case, you can click on the well you desire to chart, and the chart will interactively update automatically as you click on this stuff. Now, this also responds to the Control and Shift keys. So for example, you can select well 1, and then with the Control keystroke, you can select well 5, 10. So you can select multiple wells, as well as select entire ranges. Like I'm going to select 17 with the Control, but then with Shift as well, I'm going to select all that range from 17 to 24. Okay, you have that little filter off to select the whole thing. And the other thing you can do is to simply left click and drag. Right? So all those various ways for you to chart however many wells you want interactively from this very handy slicer. Okay, so there you go. Pivot chart with all the data in our original source, and with an interactive slicer for you to easily select the wells you want displayed. The next thing we can do is to add another slicer. In this case, I'm going to add a slicer for the date. So again, we click on the charts, we go here, pivot chart analyze menu, insert slicer, and I'm going to select a date field. But what I want to actually choose is just the year. Okay, so I'm just gonna select date year, and that's gonna bring this other slicer here. Just gonna expand it the same height. And what this does is it allows you to actually zoom in on the time access to the period you want. So let's say I'm not interested in the tail, so I'm just interested between 2020 and 2030, for example. So I'm just gonna click and drag, and that's gonna update the chart immediately to the chart period. If you want to zoom in even further, let's say from 20 to 23, do the same. 2023, drag and click. And again, same button here to filter off. It selects all the dates here. So there you go. A nice chart with the two slicers, very handy to quickly and interactively select the wells and the date time period we want the chart in. Now that we have played a little bit with the pivot chart and the slicers we created, we want now to have a go at inserting a pivot table. So what we're going to do is, let me just move this a little bit just to create some room here. I'm going to put it a little bit smaller than that. That slicer, I'm just going to just the other one also. I'm going to put it right next to here so we can see on the one screen the whole thing. Okay, so let me just select one cell here, and I'm going to go insert, and I want a pivot table, but I need to expand that button first. And what I want to do is to select from the data model, right? So I don't want to create a table pulling from any existing table on the workbook. I want to pull the data from the data model we created in the first step. Okay, so it's going to bring this window. It's going to offer you by default the cell you have already selected. So let's go OK. And now it's going to create a placeholder in that location. And as before, it's going to open up this right-hand side pane, where again, we see our gas rate data model up there. And we want to do here is to drag the fields to these spaces, same as we did with the pivot chart. But what we want to do, so let's think about this. What I want to create is a table with the wells running down here on this first column. So one row per well, and I want here 1 year per column. So when the production profile is running horizontally, 1 row per well. So what I want to do then is to drag the well name down to the rows field here. So it's going to bring all the wells on this first column. And what I want to bring now to the columns is the year. So I'm just going to select that year field. I'm going to drag it there. So it's going to add all the years in our data set in here, as you can see. And then obviously as before, what I want to actually do is to drag the gas rate field to our values space. And again, you need to make sure you're actually doing the right operation. In this case, we don't want the sum, we want the average as before. So select that to the average. Okay, that's it. So we have created our pivot table. Let's just close this for visibility. Okay, and you will notice two default additions to the table. So one is this grand total here in the final column, and another grand total row at the bottom of the table. So depending on the data you're working with, it may make sense to have those grand totals, which is just the sum of all the preceding data. You may elect to leave it there, or if you want to remove it, you just go and right click and you go remove grand total. So just for the sake of this example, we're going to remove both the grand total column and the grand total row. So remove grand total as well. And we can do a little bit of a cosmetic. So let's select the entire data set. Let's take away all decimals. And actually, you can also come here and rename this for clarity. So let's name that well or well name. And let's rename that to year. Okay, there we go. So we have a pivot table which pulls data from the data model. And in the next video, I'm going to link these slicers to this table. So with the same slicers we created for the chart, we will be able to interactively update both the chart and the table at the same time. Right now it's unlinked, so if you click on 3, it only updates the chart, but not the table. Same with the year, right? It doesn't do anything to the table, so we need to link these slicers to the table. Now, whenever we're working with pivot tables and pivot charts, it's good practice to actually name these things because these can get complicated very rapidly. If we start creating multiple charts and tables from the same data table to create, for example, a dashboard with lots of stuff in it, um, again, it can get very complicated, especially when you want to be linking slicers to all the various types of displays you have. So it's very good practice to name the charts and the tables as you create them. So let's click on this chart and pivot chart analyze menu at the top. You will see on the top left, it actually offers you a box to rename that pivot chart. That's the default name being assigned to it. So let's just rename this for the sake of this example. Let's just do UG like that. And then we're going to do the same with the table. So let's click on the table anywhere. And again, pivot chart, pivot table analyze menu, and let's rename that table into QG. Okay. For the sake of this example, let's just satisfy ourselves with those two renaming options. Okay. So right now, what we want to do is to link these slicers to the table. Okay. So how do we do that? Let's link this date slicer first. So let's click on the slicer, and we're going to go right click, and you see a report connections option there in the middle. So that's going to bring up this little window here. And as you can see right now, that slicer is linked or connected to the pivot chart QG, which is the name we just selected, but it's not actually linked to the table. So we're going to just click on the table, and now that's going to be linked to both. Now, one thing that happened here, you notice, I mean, 28 and 28, so it's linked. So if we select the whole date range, there you go. And if you select any other time period, it updates automatically. Now, one thing you noticed is the whole thing kind of compressed to the left. So that is an annoying issue that we have to deal with. And the way to fix that thing, let's restore this to a little bit wider display here. Let's say we're happy with that. So one thing you might want to do always is to go on the table and right click on any cell, and you're going to see here pivot table options, and it's going to bring this window, and at the bottom there's an auto fit column width on update, so we don't want to have that option selected. So let's just unclick that, and now any changes we do is not going to change the width of the display. So there are less years in our selection, but the width of the cells doesn't change. Okay, so that's good, right? Now let's do the same with the well slicer. So we're gonna right click on the well slicer, report connections, and again we want to also link that slicer to the table we just created. Okay, and now the table and the chart both are updated interactively by the slicers. So if we select those 5 wells, the table updates accordingly. Same with the date range. So there you go, both table, uh, chart and table linked to the two slicers. Let's select the whole thing, clicking this off, and there we go. The entire data set is being graphed and displayed on the tables.